Welcome to the Homeschool Lounge. My guest is Martie du Plessis. She is the founder of the Dynamis Institute and is well known in the home education community, having helped and guided thousands of families over 2 decades. In session 1, Martie introduced the concept of uncapped education. In this session, we will look at it in closer detail. Martie, in a nutshell, what is uncapped education?
Good evening, Anelle. It is a privilege to be here again to speak about uncapped education. Yes, uncapped education is an educational design. It is supposed to develop children in an unrestricted way. It's supposed to get rid of all restricted schemes, and it's supposed to enlarge the margins of growth and bring forth young people that transform into purposeful maturity, sent out to strengthen society. It's a policy for education for South Africa, as well as Africa and even further. It does not exclude special needs children and orphans, where we have a great responsibility, and it is also a rebuilding program for this nation. Anelle, as I said in the previous recording, it is not something that's new. It is something that homeschoolers were part of all along, and there are about 130,000 home educators, and they have built in such a way. They have sent people out into society. They have got a passion for the special need, for the orphans. They are transforming society with this task. It is now just a further program, initiative to take it further, to be more intentional in bringing this hope to a wider community of needed people.
You speak of the biometrics of uncapped education. Can you please explain what this means?
We talk about the biometrics of uncapped education. It is describing 6 equal entities. The 7th one, where it's an uncapped facilitator. The emphasis is on all these 7 equal entities, and it's strong. It shows you, if you look at the picture, the diagram, it is a hexagon. It fits in very closely. It is a strong structure, and if any one of these entities does not get equal attention or sufficient attention, the whole design can collapse.
Martie, please take us through the various parts of the uncapped education.
If you look at the left side of the photo here, we see that there's a block, a hexagon, speaking about the interests of the child, and that the parent or the adult needs to act in the interest of the child. And so with regards to home educators, with Act 84, the Schools Act, we are allowed to be home educated, and all aspects, the child's right to education says that all aspects of human potential must be developed to its fullest. Now, for that to happen, one thing that the parent must understand is that the parent is sacredly able, and this sacredly ableness also require that they protect the vulnerability of their child, that they, when there's any abuse or any fear, that this experience of it might cause tremendous trauma to the child, and it might bring a trigger in their life that will take long to get rid of. And so even if it's children in a school, we hope then that the trained Uncapped facilitator is aware of the fact that we need spiritual whole children. We need to grow spiritual whole children. We need to not enforce on them such situations that they get damaged and that they can grow their grit. It doesn't mean we just save them and spare them, but we do grow them by growing grit. It is then in the act of in the interest of the child that there is a responsible person taking it on him or her to protect the vulnerability, because the child is totally there in the hands of the adult person. When we talk about the second entity, which is philosophies, principles, values, worldview, it happens so that when children go to school, they try to follow the philosophies of the school. And in many instances, it is just so that they cannot keep going with it, because it is either too strict, it's either too stressful, and parents realize that they have to make a change. I'm giving an example. When a child must write a test every day, every week, the parent first would try to help the child and then would get him to read or learn everything out of his head, and he might have forgotten everything exactly after the test. They then found out that when the child would play out the material, he would remember better. They would find out that with a philosophy of close association or storytelling or more hands-on learning, more kinesthetic work, in other words, the child is actually moving as he learns, is learning, that they do get better results. And therefore, according to the child's giftedness, there are various philosophies and ways that families can go all over the world. It's done in this way, and as you can see on the diagram, it's either very formal and informal, or then where you can create your own approach. And it doesn't mean that Uncapped is specifically just for only informal learner, because some children do need a formal approach and they do need structure, and if they don't have that, they are very insecure. Now, the parent then make this decision based on the responses of the child, and therefore it's again a responsible act, and it is even very hard for some families. For instance, according to the research that I've done, it's hard for a mother that is a conventional type that wants to tick her boxes and just wants to get things done, to now sit and follow another approach, like making a volcano, building something, listening to a long story, talking long with the child so that they could understand it, explaining in a very concrete way, but the parent that loves the child would then do it.
In the section Know Your Child, you mention the Hello series. What is the Hello series?
Anelle, yes, I got the Hello series one afternoon very clearly, and it says, hello, how are you? What can you do? What can you do with what you are, who you are? What will it be like when you are there? And so there's many questions that you ask this child to get to know him better. Well, first of all, just by us living with our children, we get to know them, we get their preferences, we get what irritates them, what excites them, what blows their bubble, and the same with us in our interaction with them. But it is like we ignore it when it comes to learning. Now, in the Hello series, or in the Get to Know Your Child, there's ways that you can put it in an application. At first you would just write it down, but eventually when the application is done, it is easy to put it into an application. And then there's also the growth program. Now, the growth program will be done according to 21st century realities, like, for instance, the 3 R's and 7 C's. That is not so important to just do reading, writing, arithmetic, but it's also important to do communication, collaboration, creativity, cross-cultural, self-working, computing, and all those other skills that's called soft skills, but it's actually very essential skills. The first thing about the growth program is that educating a child without educating the heart is no education at all. And the beauty of home education, or then smaller group education, is where one can pay attention to the heart, because out of the heart flows everything. We can also grow grit. So if this child is very intelligent, but he gets discouraged a lot because he hits himself and he says, I must do it correct, why can't I read? Then there's grit trainers, and it can be documented also in an application. And even with regards to be in business, having your own business when you leave the schooling time, price, product, place, promotion. If it's a shy child, he would not easily promote himself. And so there's ways how one can help them to promote yourself, maybe with a blog or via the internet, instead of standing on the street corner and try to sell something. So that's the beauty of this strong entity, is do not go on with the child until the child knows you better and you know the child better, because then learning can happen much easier. When we talk about curriculum in Uncapped Education, it varies from family to family. In a learning center setup, it could be much more organized, but basically I say to parents that the parent is the best curriculum, and the parent must share with them their ethos, what they are good at. If the dad's a good storyteller, then share with your children your stories, take them out in conservation, in nature. And if the mom is a good photographer or a good cook, then let the children take part of that and share that. There's also another way, which we call the 5 Ds, and Sally Clarkson explains to us it's like building a house. There's first your discipleship studies, discipline studies, discussion in the morning, then new discoveries, and then like sciences or nature stuff. And then there's your discretionary studies, which is very specific towards the interest of the child. Like, for instance, learning to fly a drone. What is important that parents do understand that there's layer for layer work, like the maths and the languages, and specifically the more sequential parent like that to happen every day at a specific time. It is basically for the interest of the parent. The random child or the more free-flowing child can do that in a less structured way, but that's going through as layer for layer subjects, languages, maths, maybe even handwriting. And then there's your general knowledge subjects. That is not necessarily just subjects like history and geography and science, but it could even be a life skill. It could even be a new skill. As long as the children learn how to learn and they love learning, then they will be able to learn anything in any situation. In an uncapped scenario, if parents would start an uncapped center, there will be a catalogue. By next year, there will be a catalogue for choices for each of these areas of the curriculum, and parents can basically order their choices from the Uncapped catalogue. None of these possibilities will be lower or is lower than the standard of public schools, and it meets the minimum requirements of public schools.
Assessment is often seen as the only or most important measure of learning. How is assessment addressed in uncapped education?
Anelle, I'm glad that you asked about assessment. There are two ways of giving feedback. The one is, yes, through assessment, but the other also through evidence of learning, of what the child has learned. Because children are not learning in the same way, it could be very traumatic to actually learn the same material as other people and also be tested at a specific time on a specific material and in a specific time frame. And therefore, that is one of the reasons why families do take their children out. So when children are more ready to give feedback, it's easier to test them. I'm giving an example of many 10-year-olds, as it is in the news, has been said in the newspaper, are not ready, and most of them do not have a reading understanding of a 10-year-old. Now, for some of these children, they haven't been ready for formal reading at a young age. They might even be ready for reading now. So for these children to be exposed to heavy reading programs would actually put more trauma onto their lives. The same would happen with preschoolers that should actually play and are now put into situations where they have to have an extra 3 years of perceptual training before they start school, just so that they would be better in reading. Now the result will be the opposite. These children will actually be so afraid, might be so afraid, because of the experience of this formal learning. What is important is that whatever children learn, they receive it into their system, and that in some way they can give it back. It is easier for some people that if they cannot write so fast and neatly, to actually tell you the story or play the story. And so there must be opportunities to be assessed in a different way, and also to give evidence of learning in the form of photos and a portfolio of what children have learned. Home educators are not irresponsible people that is not aware that their children have learned, that's not aware that there are shortcomings, that's not aware that their children are gifted. What might be a problem for government is that they can't always see the evidence, and that is where Uncapped Education is then also training to the educator to give guidance on how it can be done, and there will also be an application that would make it easy for parents as well as educators to have a record of what this child has learned, their reading speed, their growth in different areas, and in this way a more individualized assessment and evidence of learning of the child.
Could my child obtain a school leaving certificate?
Yes, Anelle, with regards to the last entity, the certification entity, the further studies, the job placement and university, of course, Uncapped students would do a matriculation if that is needed. Only 4% of matrics get a job, and 600,000 of graduates 2 years ago could not get a job in spite of having a degree. So it is not about just get a certificate. If there's another avenue that families could go, and there are many avenues. For instance, people can go on photography courses, they can learn a skill and start working. One has to be in school until 15 or the year that you completed grade 9. To be able to go to any matric, to proceed to a matric preparation, you needed to have a grade 9 level of skill. Now, therefore, even if or when home educators have not done it in a formal way, they know that they have to get to that level before they can absorb and integrate the material of a matric certificate. And yes, then there's the Cambridge matric, the GED matric, the South African national matric, and that you pursue as needed according to the requirements of the university, and USAF will not allow you, as well as Umaluzi, which is the watchdog of the government, will not allow you to go on with further studies if you haven't got that certificate. Some children have gone through to universities, but then they could show their competency in a specific area, for instance in music. There's also then other ways, as I said, that you would start to learn a skill like baking, for instance, and then you would go to a hotel school and they would test you, and based on your competency level they would just take you in. It's quite interesting that the government has a vision to raise up 30,000 artisans by the year of 2030. And that is what homeschoolers are doing in any way. They are raising up children that is growing in their passion from a young age, and then they just go out there and they equip themselves and go and start businesses. What is exciting about the development in Uncapped Education is that it will have its own university. Yes, with mainly online opportunities, and so a child can start from a very young age, preschool age, and keep studying until you get to your doctorate degree by just being uncapped, unrestricted, free from restricted schemes, a huge margin of growth, a good growth program for young people, sending them out in society. And yes, it's an education with hope, and the idea is that there's no interference with politics and discrimination, not to any person, any cultural groups, and that specifically the special needs child and the orphans will have an opportunity, better opportunities in Uncapped Education, purely because you acknowledge the individual level and gift and strengths and weaknesses of this child, and you work out a program specifically for this child, student and adult. And so UNCAP will also form part of adult training, the rebuilding of society with the Step Up program, where even adults that could not have the opportunities in the past will be able to be integrated in creating a future for themselves.
Martie, will uncapped facilitators need to receive special training?
Yes, the Uncapped Facilitator will definitely be trained. The first requirement is, and awareness is, that you need to understand the sacredness and be willing to be used in a sacred way, in a way where there is an interest in these children and how they grow and the individual giftedness of these children, and yes, to be used in that way. A sacredly able teacher, sacredly able parent, And yes, the training will be mostly online training since 2020, and then there will be a practical application or place where you can go and visit and see how it is done. Also a mentorship program to make sure that you're not alone out there. But the training will involve a deep understanding of the biometrics of Uncapped and how all these entities are working together, get equal emphasis, and if not, the whole design can collapse. Mr. Ramaphosa said there is no money to train teachers. There will be a lot of money spent on reading programs, on early learning programs. It might just put a lot of pressure on the already sensitive and vulnerable child. Some parents just say no, we don't want it anymore, and there is hope for South Africa because many have already done it. Uncapped Education is describing something that has been done. It does work, and it brings hope to many people.